Hello and welcome to Creative Vitality Jam Sessions. Here we have intimate conversations with extraordinary dance and theater artists about reimagining creativity and supporting and building community. CVJS and I walk in solidarity and as allies for equality, justice, and respect. Black Lives Matter. Let's unite. I'm Helen Pickett, and today's guest is Brandon Stirling Baker. He's a lighting designer for the Boston Ballet and a freelance lighting designer all over the world. Hello, Brandon. Welcome.
Hi, good to see you.
You too. Thank you so much for being here. We don't really get so many different kinds of artists. So I am really excited to talk with a lighting designer today that, yes, I've worked with, but that has worked all over the world and creates, beauty in a different kind of art form that many people don't know about. So let's just start. First question that I ask everybody: what part of the world are you in?
I'm in Inwood, New York, which is the northern tip of Manhattan.
Nice. Okay. All right. So, Brandon, I would like to start with 2019, shortly before the pandemic. The Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum Works in Process series commissioned you with a program, the Choreography of Light, dedicated to your work as a lighting designer for ballet. So it would be great if you could go into what the Choreography of Light was. And maybe how the project took shape when you were offered that. And so if this was a collection of your ideas from previous works.
Yeah, so the project, the seed of the project began in 2018. And I was a resident, had a residency with the Center for Ballet and the Arts at NYU, which is this amazing facility and research facility that is really dedicated to all artists working in dance, not just ballet. And what I had seen prior to applying for that residency is it was a lot of scholars, choreographers, and composers, but there were no designers. And so I felt there was a great need for myself and my work, but also just for designers in general, to have a place where we can explore ideas. And so I wrote this whole proposal, and I applied for this sort of project called the Choreography of Light, which was initially just going to create one ballet that was inspired by light. And where normally, in the design process or in the choreographic process, it begins with music and then the choreography and then the design elements. In this instance, everything began with the light. And so in the same way that a choreographer would create phrases with movement or music, I was creating phrases with light. And so that was it was totally an experiment. There was no real agenda beyond that. But what I found is after creating this project at the Center for Ballet at NYU, a lot of producers and a lot of organizations in the arts and ballet companies were very excited by this idea. And so I took this opportunity to commission two choreographers to sort of work with me on this. And one of them was Jamar Roberts from Alvin Ailey, who's their current resident choreographer, and the other being Justin Peck, who's the resident choreographer of City Ballet. And so, but at the Center for Ballet and the Arts, that early version was just myself and Jamar Roberts. And we sort of, like I said before, created sort of phrases. So some movement was inspired only by color, some movement was only inspired by direction, and some of it was inspired by intensity. And so it was very simple in its ingredients, but I have to say it was pretty extraordinary what we came up with. And so then, a year later, the Guggenheim Museum had heard about this project, and they said, and I'd already had a relationship with the Guggenheim for quite some time, but I was never the focus of any of their work. And so they said, you know what, we haven't had a program dedicated to a lighting designer since the 90s. And the last time it was Jennifer Tipton. And so it was a great honor to have a whole evening sort of dedicated to light. And even though, although I was sort of the the main focus in a way, my work is never about me. It's always just about the light and the dance. And so I think that still sort of stayed true in this project.
Well, I have to say, in listening to you and choreographing, like having the light come first, I mean, as a choreographer, my whole like movement center lit up. I thought, oh my God, I want to do that with you. I mean, it sounds, first of all, the puzzle of it, because to me, it's such a new thing to find even the music in the light that you're creating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That,
yeah.
you know, like, because there's music in everything, and there's movement in everything, and there's energy in everything, and all of that. Like, okay, so we have to talk. It sounds fascinating, and I wish I could have seen it.
Yeah, and it's on YouTube, so if you can see it, you can see the whole thing. So
That's great. So everybody could see it.
everyone can see it. It's on YouTube, and you just type in Choreography of Light, and then the Guggenheim Museum has it streaming always. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. I will look at that after this. So also in 2019, you received a prestigious Knights of Illumination. I love that. The Knights of Illumination Award. Can you explain this award and the work, you know, that received it, your work that received that award?
Yeah, so it's an award that's like in the design world pretty huge, and it's really a huge, like very prestigious award. But normally it's been in the UK. It's never been in America, and I think it's been in the UK for maybe 20 years or so. And it's just a way for lighting designers of all mediums to sort of have a place where their work can be celebrated. Because very often, especially in the world of dance, I have to say, there is no real recognition for designers. And for, let's say, the Bessies, which I think are an amazing, program, they have nothing dedicated to lighting designers. They have something that will say it maybe best production, and that sort of encompasses the whole team. But I just think there's something pretty amazing about a ceremony that exists for light. And so I think it was about 4 years ago, LDI and many other lighting organizations came together and created a United States like sort of branch of this. And so it was pretty amazing. And it takes place in different places throughout the US, like different years. But this award, they celebrate artists in theater, opera, dance, and live concerts, and film and television. And so it's really like all artists of light. And I received the award for dance for work I designed for Justin Peck at the Houston Ballet. The piece was in 2018, their 2018-19 season. It was called Reflections. And it was a pretty amazing work. And Justin and I have a long partnership. We've been working together for 12 years now. And so this work, Reflections, was our like 25th premiere. So it's really special to be recognized for this work, and just to be recognized anyway. And so I think 2019 was a pretty amazing year for those reasons, to have the Guggenheim and the New York Times and the Illumination Award. So it was very special. So it was nice.
Well, Brendan, and I believe we've spoken about this in the dark as, we're lighting together and working together. But I've said it, lighting is, as we've just said, it's an art form, and it also takes time. And I don't know if you agree with this, I'm sure you do, but the time offered to create your art form in dance, that's all I know, really isn't a lot of hands-on time. You work, as we all do, all artists do, before the fact. But that time in the theater, man, you've got to have the ability to see things before it gets on stage, because the time is short and precious. And I think it goes hand in hand with also not being recognized. Like you said, the Knights of Illumination, there is so much. I learned it with my second piece. Light can make or break a piece. It really can.
Right, right. Yeah, I
That
agree.
the heaviness of that importance.
Yeah, there's a great quote by Jennifer Tipton that says like 99% of an audience is unaware of light, but 100% is affected by it. And I think that very much is true with a lot of things, but that I would say is a pretty great way of thinking about the work we do. But regarding the time, I think I have yet to be ever in any company I've worked with, a company that really gives a very lenient amount of time. I mean, like when I first worked with City Ballet, I used to think that that was very short in its schedule, but now I look at it as pretty long. So it's like, it's interesting. It's all about context, I guess, but.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Okay. So you studied at three renowned universities, California Institute of the Arts in LA, which I've also taught at. I love this campus. It's a beautiful campus. The Yale School of Drama as a special research fellow in design, and I want to hear about this. And then, and I never knew this, the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama in Glasgow. I've spent a lot of time in Glasgow with Scottish Ballet, and I love that city. So I want to hear how you got there. I want to hear about your special research in design as a fellow at Yale. And if the study in Glasgow was again centered on light, or if you went in another direction.
Yeah, so Cal Arts, so I'm from Los Angeles originally. I grew up in LA. And so I'd always been aware of Cal Arts, and many of my mom's like friends and family had went there. And so I knew of this like really amazing place that was just north of the city. And it's kind of like oddly kind of feels like the middle of nowhere, even though I'm from LA, but I had never been to Valencia. It's kind of this amazing beacon of the arts. And so I studied lighting there for undergrad. But while I was there in school, I studied also animation, and my closest friends were all animators. Many of my closest friends were dancers, so I also got interested in dance while I was there. But while I was in that program, I had never left the country, and I'd always wanted to travel, but my family could never afford it. And so I actually worked with the deans of the school, because there was an exchange program for actors for the Royal Scottish Academy. There's a long partnership for many years, but there was no exchange for the designers. And so I had wrote a proposal saying, hey, this would be really essential to my life's work, and it would really inform my work at Cal Arts and beyond. And they really agreed with it. And so they helped and supported me. And so I went to, I spent my last year of college in Glasgow. And I actually wanted to take a break from lighting, because I felt like it's really important to step away just to understand and have a better sort of clear mind of what I do and what everyone else does. And so I studied costume design and set design, but over there they call it scenography. And so I was a scenography major in Glasgow, and I loved it. It changed my life, and it really changed the way I view the world. And I met all my closest friends were other exchange students from other countries. And I went to see the Scottish Ballet, I'll never forget. And so I saw many things. I love that country, and I love that city. It was very creative. And then I came back. Yeah. No, I love it. It's beautiful. And then I moved, when I came back to LA to graduate. Basically, I've been out of school now for 12 years or so, but just during the pandemic is when I had applied for a residency or a fellowship at Yale. And so when the world shut down, shortly after you and I worked together, I immediately was thinking, oh my God, I have no work for over a year. So what am I going to do? And I've always been a great admirer of teaching, and I love education in general. And so I found out that the Yale School of Drama had a research fellowship for professional artists that are interested in teaching. And the program itself, I believe, was created for architects who wanted to study more of a scenic theatrical approach, or even artistic directors sometimes can apply for this if they want to study design. So that's a thing. But it's a 1-year course and there's no degree, there's nothing, but you get to really like study the syllabus, you take all the classes that any master's student would take. And so my focus was on design education, but with an emphasis on lighting with Jennifer Tipton. So I studied with Jennifer for a year. And what was very special about this is it was her last year teaching. She retired from teaching. So I was very lucky to have that time. And I've known her for many years as a colleague. We've lit many ballets on the same program. But so it was very cool to have that time. But while I was at school at Yale, I developed my own syllabus for teaching design for dance. And I'm hoping that I can continue that elsewhere. So it was a really great use of this time. You know, the pandemic was, I've never been so busy in my life. So it was really, really busy. So I'm very grateful for that. Financially, not so great, but really artistically amazing.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Brandon. I really, now granted, I had my health, I had my apartment, I applied for unemployment and got it. It saved my butt. So I too was allowed to delve into, I feel like the pandemic was extremely busy of my own doing. And I got to do things that I'd always wanted to do that I never did. This thing at Yale sounds amazing. And I wanted to ask you, that's right. I wanted to ask you, do you know Christopher Janney? He's a light and sound architect. That's what he calls it. Okay, I just wanted to ask. Okay.
Yeah, I'll look him up though. Yeah.
Yeah. I've said it, lighting design is a remarkable art form. I have so much respect for it and curiosity, because it's something that I feel is an endless study that I know the tip of the iceberg about. From the two ends of the spectrum, the note that's not played, that's very often, and I think sometimes that's why it's not recognized. It's really like the note not played goes back to what Jennifer Tipton's quote is. By the way, I love her and have worked with her in the Wooster group, and she's an amazing woman. And then, so it can be the note not, this is the ends of the spectrum, right? The note not played, and it can also storm the stage with energy. I've always been enthralled with the storytelling capacity of lighting design. What drew you to the art form? How did you get drawn in, the aspects that you were inspired by and perhaps continue to be inspired by? And you kind of went into this already because you've studied things, but the other forms of design that influence your work, I guess your scenography degree, it all folds in, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I'm inspired by many things. And actually I often say to choreographers that I have a lot more in common with you than I do with many of the technicians. Like my training and my passion is completely with music and color and space. Wiring is not my specialty. I'm not at all trained in that way, but I have great admiration for it. And I'm very dependent on a team to support my work. And so, but I say this only that I look at light and at life in that view. Like I don't really look at anything in a technical point of view. I tend to look at space in its most honest way, if I can. And I try and be an innocent audience when I go to see a ballet in its rehearsal studio. But I guess in terms of inspiration, I mean, like I love light and space artists like James Turrell and Dan Flavin. I also study a lot of film. Like I'm very much into cinematography, and even before the pandemic, I've just had great admiration for, films from the 1940s and 30s and black and white film. And so I think I try and find as much inspiration outside of the theater as possible and outside of dance, because I find that it influences my own work, and that I think that when we go see work on a stage, we want to see work that has influences from all over. I'm not as interested in working on a project that's very self-contained in its influences. Like I like to work with people who curious and open-minded to the what ifs, so to speak. But yeah.
Yeah, your what ifs I call the walk up the stairs. Because it's the anticipation of a thing, right? It's a thing that keeps you sitting forward.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I know that I'm going to use different words, but I know that you and I have spoken very much about that you like the aspect almost of not seeing the light. You said in its very honest form. Are you also drawn as an artist? This is a separate question, but as an artist, as a designer, are you also drawn to, do you like to create, let's say, more bombastic or more like not shock value, but something that where the lighting design is really stark and contrasted and maybe jumps at you? Is this also an interest in you?
It's, it's funny. It's not. My work is, if there's anything, it's my work's, I love the way I like to think of it is, there's like sure 3 ways you could think of the work I do as a lighting designer. There's one you could say is there's like an illusion. As a lighting designer, I create sort of illusionistic world for the dance or characters to inhabit. Like another way is by saying, I design a visually responsive world that's in response to the movement or the music. And then the last one, which I've learned all this from a great friend and admirer, Clifton Taylor, is that we design a frame in which the work can be performed. Okay. And so I often think of my work as a lighting designer as a designer of frames, and that it doesn't have to be about the light. I like to support the dance, and like in a way, some people could say, is that staying out of the way? Well, maybe, but I like to think that the dance is there for a reason, and that I can enhance that experience. I'm not there to distract from it. And it's just I have a lot of trust in choreography, is my point. And maybe I've been spoiled to work with a lot of amazing choreographers where the work itself is incredible. So if I were to like decorate it, it would be self-aware lighting, in my opinion. And so a lot of the work I do, basically all the work I do, I would say, is it's never aware of itself, or I hope it's not. It's always in reaction to either the movement or the space. If I'm working with a set designer, which I often do, how does the light connect to the room? How does the light connect to the backdrop? Is it an extension of the sky? Like, why does the light even exist in the first place? Like that, to me, these are all the things I'm subconsciously always thinking about in any dance that I light. And that's always true. And so it's, I think that way even about the color palette. Like to me, when I listen to music, when I'm working with any choreographer, I ask for the music. And I do that just to hear if there's a presence of color in that music. If there is, the light doesn't always have to follow that, in my opinion. That the light, if it's already colorful in the music, the light doesn't have to echo that. It could be interesting if it's the opposite. Like, what if it's all white light? And then the music already inherently is very colorful. Like I did a project with Justin Peck called his version of Rodeo for the New York City Ballet, and it was a minimalist version. And so there were no cowboys, no farms, none of that. It was just a white space, not so dissimilar. Now that I think of it, from Pedal and like and even some of the stuff with Forsyth, except there wasn't walls. It was just a white sky and a white floor and white legs and white borders. So it was a white frame. But I have to say, there was something pretty amazing by hearing the color of the music of Aaron Copland. And if I were to decorate that with like pinks and lavenders and purples, like it would have been so dated, in my opinion. I think that, like, in a way, what I've learned a lot from many choreographers is our art form continues to move, continues to evolve. It's always changing. And I think that there has to be, in the design, some sort of a maturity within that movement and that growth. And so that's where I come to terms that I listened for the dance, I listened for the music, and then I see where the light can exist or how it should exist. With that being said, sometimes there's instances where the light really is needed to help, and so I think of it both ways, but I tend to think on the simpler side.
Well, and then I have to, okay, but then I have to go back to your choreography of light.
Yeah. Well, that was an exercise. Like to me, the choreography of light, that's actually really, I'm glad you said that. What's really important about that project, it was never to reinvent my process.
Yeah.
It was all about the what ifs. And it was all about that exploration of creating movement inspired by light. But when you look at, and you'll see it, when you look at the Choreography of Light project, everything was there for a reason. There was the white light variation, which was a solo that was all with variations of white light. There was the color of dance, which was like a dance entirely inspired by saturation of color. So it was very much embracing color, but like literally everything was that color. And then there was a section called Days Gone By, which was inspired by the direction of daylight. So it took us through the arc of a sunrise to its peak to a sunset. And so actually, I kind of think that the Choreography of Light project kind of reinforces it in that way. It's like it was all really selective. What I loved about that project, and I still think it's still connected to my work today, it was all there for a reason. Always. So yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. Brandon, you make work, pardon me, for opera, for theater, and for dance, all very different milieu, or are they?
I kind of don't think so.
Yeah.
I used to divide them up into like sort of different genres, so to speak. But when I like a lot more, ballet really is my life, and majority of my work is in ballet. But over the past, I would say 3 or 4 years, I've been working a lot in opera as well. And I have to say, I kind of lit the opera like a dance. It kind of all felt like the same. My instincts were the same. And this opera I did recently with the Opera Philadelphia, it was a collaboration between Anthony Roth Costanzo and Philip Glass. And the name of the project was called Glass Handel. And it was all about like two different forms of music coming together with opera and a little bit of dance. But I lit it, and I mean, I lit the piece no different than I would light I think anything really. And I think even, let's say, a play, there's still a rhythm to a play.
Yeah.
And so I often, even with some theater directors, if there's no music in the play, I'll ask them, well, if you could give me a score, what would it be? And I'll do that just to get a sense of the tone,
Right.
of how the rhythm would be. And so to me, it's all the same mindset. So yeah.
So, and then at the same time, you work with a multitude of directors, composers, choreographers, and visual artists. So I'm going to get to the installation idea. So,
Yeah.
you eagerly embrace these diverse worlds. To name a few: Savion Glover, Shepard Fairey, Suf John Stevens, Jamar Roberts, William Forsythe, Anthony Roth Costanzo, who you just mentioned, Bryce Dresner, Daniel Buren, George Kondo, Pam Tanowitz, Alonzo King, Damien Witzel, Carl Jensen, or Jensen, I'm not sure how, and Marcel Dezama. Did I say that right? Yeah. Stephen Powers, Michelle Dorrance, Benjamin Mupier, Caleb Teicher, and James Ortiz. And since 2010, frequent collaborator with Justin Peck, as you said, 25 pieces. That's remarkable. Does this puzzle of new work in various mediums, how does it intrigue you? I think we've spoken about it now, but there is a puzzle, for example, well, no, you've actually explained it well. It isn't a puzzle because you approach it as, what does the space need? What does the music tell me to do? So I think I've answered that question. But here's another one. How do the dialogues of collaboration manifest? You've spoken about that as well. I know you to be a very keen listener, and I think that when I hear you speak now, that has everything to do with how you're also listening for the light in the space. I can, like, so many of these pieces are going together now, and little bit that we've been together. Like you're a listener. You listen for what is needed. And you also are an observer. You not only study music space, but you also study the human being you're working with.
Right.
So, and that has a lot to do also with collaboration and like the symbiosis of where two, let's say two people meet and where they differ and how that difference can also make perhaps a new avenue, or also that we butt heads and we talk about it and both plead our cases or whatever. But you're a proprioceptive listener. You were shaking your head, so I guess you believe that is true. So the psychology of the collaboration, how does that figure in?
Well, that's my favorite part, is that all these people that you've mentioned, they're all very, very different artists.
Yeah.
And very different ways of thinking about movement, about music, about space and light. But yet the thing is, it's interesting to me, is they hire me for a reason. So there is a through line throughout all these very different styles of choreography. Like when I work with Jamar, his background is in illustration. So he's a long time famous dancer, but he was an illustrator and an animator while he was dancing with Ailey. And only recently have people known his work as a choreographer. Yet I've always known him as a visual artist. So it's interesting working with him. He's a lot like working with an illustrator or a painter. Real, I mean, very, very in a very literal sense. Like he's very hyper aware of color, not in a way that is I think like intrusive. Like he's actually like, he really just takes it all in. He's like, wow, okay, this is totally right. He has a lot of trust also in the process. And I think that in any collaboration, if there's no trust, it's very difficult to get any work done. And so I think above all, what's the through line is through all these different artists is finding what's important to them and their work. What's the big picture we're looking for? I love to know with every choreographer what their influences are. And then I still, though, however, approach the work in somewhat of a similar language, but it's every dance, even if it's the same choreographer, has its own vocabulary. I don't tend to repeat myself in that way. I actually very rarely repeat myself. But I think there's a mentality that's consistent throughout all the work. But yeah.
And so the psychology of the person you're working with fits in, but it still fits into a scheme that you very much believe in.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of like anything in life. You surround yourself with like-minded people.
And what about if you like, do you also welcome the unlike-minded people to as a learning?
Yeah, oh, for sure. Like I lit a ballet for the Cincinnati Ballet, and I won't say who the choreographer was, but they were very in the process very frustrated with the light. And the reason why is they didn't know how to speak about light. And I said, you don't have to, I said, don't worry, like it's really okay. You don't have to say a single thing about light, but just tell me something about the dance. And this choreographer had a hard time even describing her own dance.
Wow.
So to me, that was a challenge because it was not about light. It was about, well, what's this piece? What's the feeling of this piece? And their comment to me was that it just look really cool, look epic. I was like, yeah, but that's not really, like, doesn't say much. So I think that that's a challenge. And so I'm trying to understand the root. It's, again, it has nothing to do with light. It has to do with, well, why does this dance exist? Why are we creating this dance now? And if it's abstract, even better. But still, there has to be some sort of emphasis somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I always say, well, if you could describe it in one word, what is it? And so it's just things like that. So, I mean, it is tricky. I joke that it's sometimes like dating. Like you have to you meet people and sometimes it's a really good mix, sometimes it's not, but that's okay. And it's a lot, you learn a lot about people, you learn a lot about life. And so I find it all very interesting regardless, but there's no easy solution. I think you have to work through it sometimes. But again, it comes back to the trust thing.
Yeah, you're right. It does. And you're talking about trust in each other, but I think if there's no trust in the person, the individual to start with, if there's insecurity in that person, very hard to trust someone else.
Oh yeah, and in that project, it wasn't just the light that was, every area was constantly being reimagined and questioned. I was like, oh no, we have no time for, I mean, like and it had nothing to do with their work. Actually, their work was really beautiful, but it was just how do you describe it to your collaborators? Because we're all here to support you. And so if it's tricky, it's interesting, but.
Yeah. So your lighting has been presented nationally and internationally in major venues, including Lincoln Center, Kennedy Center, Walt Disney Concert Hall, Hollywood Bowl, Brooklyn Academy of Music, Théâtre du Châtelet, one of my favorite theaters. It was our home for 10 years with the Frankfurt Ballet. And there's one particular staircase that I know has been there, like, for as long as it's been there. And I just imagine all those hands, all the artists using that railway, but that rail. But Sadler's Wells in London, Hong Kong Cultural Center, Maison de la Danse in Lyon, Teatro Carlo Felice in Genoa, and the Guggenheim Bilbao, Spain. An amazing building. How does, you've explained things so thoroughly. So now I'm questioning some of these questions because I don't know if we need, okay, how does the shape of light juxtapose with the shape of the room? You've spoken a bit about this, and does the age and history of the venue, I guess that's a new way to look at these questions. Does the age and the history of the venue ever figure into your design? Like the Châtelet, for example, or the bombast of the Guggenheim Bilbao?
Oh, for sure. I mean, so I'm a huge lover of history. Like I am obsessed with history, even in New York. I live in New York and I'm constantly surrounded by history. And so to me, I love to understand why things are the way they are in terms of context and history, not technically, but just why does it exist? Like, why was it there? And who was here before me and so on. But that curiosity even exists, or that mindset still exists even at Lincoln Center, for example. Like Lincoln Center, what many people don't know, at New York City Ballet, one of the very first lighting designers ever was Jean Rosenthal. And she was the first resident lighting designer of the New York City Ballet. And she was a woman. So many of the pioneers of the field of lighting design were women. And there's a lineage that's really, really interesting just in that building alone at the State Theater at Lincoln Center. And so there's only been a handful of lighting designers that have worked in that space. And so I think of that I don't take that lightly. Like I think of it very carefully. And so that sort of mindset, I think about that in every room I'm in, especially historic spaces like the Châtelet or other spaces in like Germany. Like I worked a lot in Berlin, and just thinking about, oh my God, I was like 2 miles away from the Berlin Wall. Like, so I like to think a lot about when the curtain rises, not only are we presenting this ballet and this work for a new audience, but for a new community or city or culture, but it's also an extension of us as humans. And so I think there's something really beautiful about understanding the history of a space and how you're contributing to that history. And so that's, again, another reason why when I'm lighting any work, like I don't take anything lightly. Like every choice, it's important to me because this could be the last thing I ever light, and that's okay. But so I treat everything, every project sort of like that in a way. And so sometimes we have 5 minutes to light something and it'll be one beautiful look, one beautiful cue, but I've given it everything I can and I'm not going to stress myself out over it, but I give it everything I've got. Even if it's one image, it's one beautiful image. And so what I love about also mixed repertory and different spaces is we get to see many different voices. It's like a living, breathing museum of artists and voices from designers, choreographies, and composers. And so the fact that we can share these identities in different spaces all over the world, literally, is pretty amazing to me. And so, yeah.
It's inclusive.
Yeah.
And it's community.
Very much. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm learning so much. Thank you. I mean, it's okay. So back to the questions we have. We have the three that I ask everybody, and one more for you. So, your lighting can be. Wait a minute. Oh, well, okay. So now I'm going to go into the repertoire: New York City Ballet, American Ballet Theater, San Francisco Ballet, Dutch National Ballet, Hong Kong Ballet, Berlin Staatsballet, Miami City Ballet, Joffrey Ballet, Pacific Northwest Ballet, Boston Ballet, the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, Houston Ballet, Semper Opera Dresden. I love that theater, by the way. I loved working in that theater. The Opera Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Ballet, now Philadelphia Ballet, Cincinnati Ballet. Oh my gosh, I'm almost done. Paul Taylor's American Modern Dance, Los Angeles Dance Project, and many others. In the context of dance, okay, has your perspective, of course it has, of course your perspective has shifted over the years because you're a gatherer of information. That's what I hear.
Yes,
right? Okay.
Absolutely. But I should say that every company, you have to sort of work in a different way. And that's the same with choreographers. And so what's interesting to me is how can you maintain that sort of approach in any theater, which is very interesting to me. Like like I work a lot in Amsterdam, and so one lighting designer came up to me and he said, Brandon, your work is so American.
What does that mean? Yeah.
And I knew exactly what he was. It was funny to me, but he said this to me. He's a lighting designer for a very famous European choreographer, and what he meant by that, it was very bright. And what was interesting is I was hired to come out to the Dutch National Ballet to light works for a Dutch choreographer. So there was a reason, again, why they were flying an American to Amsterdam to light a Dutch ballet, so to speak. And so I said to him, well, there's a certain look that comes with, every artist, you can say this about any artist, has a very specific style and identity in their work and the way they approach things. But there's a reason I'm here. And then so I think that I have to trust that at the end of the day, but I don't get caught up too much in the American design approach versus European. But you could argue, if you had to simplify, there's a cliche that all European dance is very much stark and dark and very cold in a sense, and the American work is very bright and warm and open space, and so, which is great too. And so you could argue that most of my work is quite bright for that reason, but it's you can't really simplify it. It just depends on the piece, but it's just interesting to me how that identity and that awareness changes per company, even in the United States.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to go to the other questions because some of these, so these last questions seem a little redundant because, you've explained so beautifully where, how, who you are in, with your design. So, in supporting and building a more equitable community, let's say arts community, what are some specific daily practices we can be active with?
So actually, last summer, right after the horrible sort of events of George Floyd, I was thinking, well, what can I do as an artist or as a lighting designer to sort of contribute or make a difference or help with this horrible situation? And so I sort of created a nonprofit collective of lighting designers called the Inlight Collective. And I commissioned choreographers, poets, and visual artists and other lighting designers to create work, but all told through the medium of light. And so we did this, and I pitched this idea to Kotzbahn, and last summer we did it in one of their historic spaces, which was really amazing. But what I'm most proud of in this sort of project is that it's taken on its own life. And I decided that, you know what, I wanted to get this thing up and going. And now I'm very proud to say that it's entirely run and supported by all BIPOC artists. And it includes artists like Hope Boykin and Jamar Roberts and Rachel Blackwell and many others. And so I'm very, very proud of that it's taken on its own life. But it all really started by thinking, well, I'm a lighting designer and I'm out of work and I'm in the pandemic. Well, what can I do? Well, why not use the medium of light to make a difference? And so in many ways, it's very simple, but it was to me very important that it happened. And so it did. And now it's happened in New York, in Brooklyn, in Virginia, Washington, D.C., and then soon in Colorado. So it's really cool. So that was sort of my way of being more inclusive and sort of creating a voice through the medium of light.
That's amazing. That's beautiful. But going right to the thing that you are so connected with and thinking, how can this actually, what opportunity can this give to others? Beautiful. You've shared so much, but do you have this is kind of meant to be spontaneous, share a favorite or impactful memory from your creative life?
I mean, I have to say, I lit my first, my first big premiere for the ballet world at the New York City Ballet in 2012 when I was 24. And so it was pretty amazing. I had just 2 years prior, I was an intern at the New York City Ballet. And while I was an intern there, I became close friends with many, many dancers and choreographers and composers that were all of my age and generation. And I didn't know if anything would come of it, but we just became close friends. And what I found is there was this amazing sort of eagerness to create a new voice, and at least at that company especially, and then it sort of echoed elsewhere. But that premiere in 2012 was a really special moment to say that I made my design debut at the New York City Ballet. It was pretty amazing. So it was very cool. It changed my life. So I'll never forget that day. And I'm proud to say that work still is in rep. So it's very cool. And it's weird to see it because it's the choices that I made, almost 12 years ago now. So it's crazy.
Yeah. Wow. And then last question, is there an insight? Is there a nutshell or something about living a creative life that you can offer?
I think that, as a young designer and artist, that I think that you have to let yourself continue to be motivated. I have to say, with projects like the Center for Ballet and the Arts, for the Choreography of Light, or even other independent projects, there were many people along the way, even when I first moved to New York, that were not always supportive in some of these ideas. And I have to say, what was so exciting to me is by continuing to pursue them. And that pursuit and that eagerness to see it through really changed my life. And there were an example I can give is the Choreography of Light project is, maybe one could say, oh, it's been done in many different versions. And you could say, yeah, everything's been done. There's that famous quote by Balanchine that there's no new steps, only new combinations. And I think the same way for light. But I have to say that although some projects have been done in other ways, I have never experienced them on my own. And I think it's really important for any artist to have that experience and not get too caught up on what's been done. And so if I had never like pursued these side projects or like unique experiences on my own, I would probably be living at home on a couch. So I think it's really important to keep, you know, pursuing things and just give it everything you've got. So it's, I never let others sort of drag me down or like, and so I think that's been really key to my life and success as a young designer. So yeah.
Yeah. Brandon, this was such a joy, and you were so generous in how you shared and described your amazing art form. Thank you so much. I'd like to direct viewers to find out more about you. Do you have a website that you, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so my website is stirlingbaker.com. It's STIRLING baker.com. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, on YouTube, you can see the Choreography of Light through the Guggenheim Museum's page. And yeah, that's it.
Well, there is going to be a short bio of you, of Brandon, that will accompany this video. And before we go in our thanks, I just want to announce the next guest, and that will be Penny Templeton. She's a renowned acting teacher, coach, director, and author who I also studied with back in the early 2000s. So I want to thank you, Gracie Spina, for all that you do. I want to thank our beautiful art world who's held us up, especially during COVID. Thank you so much. And Brandon, thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm very excited. Thanks.
I'll see you soon.
Bye.